In Strasbourg, France, in 1518, in the blistering heat of summer, up to several hundred people felt compelled to dance. The plague of uncontrollable dancing was fatal. By some accounts, one woman began dancing outside her house, not stopping for several days, and then more and more joined in. The thing is, it totally mystified the doctors. The people weren't stopping much to eat, drink, or sleep. Their feet were bruised and bleeding, and even when they were too tired to continue, they kept going on until they collapsed. By some accounts, up to 15 people per day died of heart attacks, strokes, and exhaustion. What was going on? This is possibly the most mysterious and unexplainable plague I've come across in all my research, so I had to dig deeper. And as I looked back into history, I found cases of real curses, demonic possession, strange zombie powder, religious cults, bizarre witchcraft sightings, and more. So I had to ask, did any of them line up with this paranormal time period? You know, the dancing plague was first attributed to overheated blood. Well, after you hear what I found about the supernatural things happening in France in the 1500s, you might think differently. This is the story of the dancing plague. A quick reminder to like and subscribe to make sure you don't miss out on any updates or content drops. All your support lets us keep making this content, so thanks a lot for watching. Here are the facts. News starts spreading that one woman has the dancing fever, then more join in, and it seems like they can't stop. Maybe overheated blood is the cause, so let's section off an area for them to dance off their sickness. We'll even get a band to accompany them. Surely fighting fire with fire won't set the forest ablaze, right? Yeah, you can guess how that turned out. The party only grew into a rager, and the people's wild, erratic dance motions didn't stop. So the town leaders changed tactics and decided instead to ban all dancing and almost all music entirely, because if one extreme doesn't work, the other totally will. But that didn't work either, so they finally took the dancers to a nearby religious shrine for Saint Vitus, the patron saint of dancers. Bizarrely, they put the afflicted people in red shoes and led them around a wooden figure of the saint. Okay, hold up. That's freaking weird. Why red shoes? Some accounts say the dancing finally stopped after that because Saint Vitus had protected them, and some think the saint had been appeased by their repentance since he was the one who'd sent down this punishment for sinners in the first place. But what really happened? Before I get to the modern explanations, I need to talk about some of the weird paranormal phenomena you might not have heard of in any other video on the dancing plague. Check this out. There were spirit or ghost sightings not long before the dancing plague struck. In 1516 in Alsace, France, a woman claimed she saw the ghost of her dead soldier husband clutching between bloody hands his own severed head. Another spirit gave her a golden cup, which it was assumed was stolen by the devil. Why'd they assume that? I don't know, but she sold the cup for 80 gold coins. But it wasn't just one ghost sighting. Around the same time, one researcher found that thousands imagined their dead relations to have escaped from purgatory. These legions of fury were said to be wandering from mountain to valley. At night, their spirits were to be seen among streets and fields, running and screaming to the music of drum and pipe. Many of those killed in battle were reported to be carrying their bloodied and mutilated limbs. So people were claiming to see ghosts or their dead relatives running around the fields right before this dancing plague. They started assuming these were entities leaking out of purgatory because there's no other apparent reason they should be spotting spirits running around.
When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth.
Let me just walk you through how bad their luck got from then on, because it's pretty intense. As soon as these people started seeing ghosts fresh out of purgatory, immediately grain became extremely scarce and expensive. By Christmas, the cost had almost doubled from 2 years before and reached its highest level for over a generation. Then they were hit with a terrible, brutal winter, the temperature dropping below zero and staying there for months. That's when famine and death got worse. I mean, man, these people were having some bad luck. In fact, when he had to write about the year 1517, one chronicler of the time just called it the bad year. I'll say. Then in 1518, the dancing plague broke out. Now, there's speculation that this was a case of mass hysteria or just stressed and struggling people needed an outlet. But given that they were dancing until their feet literally bled and could not seem to stop, others think there was something else at play. We've all seen The Exorcist or heard of possession in the West. There have been other stories of being bewitched all over the world, which I'll talk about a little bit later. First, though, I wanted to know, How do we know there was something supernatural going on in France at all? Well, it didn't start or end with the dancing plague in 1518. Some believe there was a curse going around, and I found reports from the 1500s of people actually practicing witchcraft and black magic. In my episode on men who sold their souls, I talked about a shocking historical story. King Charles IX of France had gone to a crossroads one night to meet the devil. There was even a cross put up at the spot it happened, which was still there in the early 1900s and reported on it in a newspaper. Well, I found out that's not the end of the story. Now, whether you agree with these conclusions or not, I'm just going to tell you what was being reported at the time, because these people were actually there, and we're sitting here talking about it 444 years later. Yeah, I checked. The lead chronicler of witchcraft in the late 1500s was Jean Bodin. Pretty interesting profession, don't you think? Bodin couldn't exactly accuse a king directly without losing his head, literally. So without saying his name, Bodin indicated that Charles would wear the image of Jupiter around his neck, inscribed with certain words. It was essentially a talisman to make himself more powerful and get something he wanted. Whether you think that stuff works or not, Charles IX and his friends totally did. And it only gets crazier from here, because what else Bodin found actually corroborates paranormal explanations of the dancing mania from the dancing plague of 1518. Let's set the scene. In 1571, Charles was dining with a group of lords when a French magician named Toisechel was brought in. Of course his name was Toisechel. What else would a magician be named in France but Toisechel? Well, this guy had been accused of witchcraft. He confessed how his fellow witches got around, their kinds of dances, sacrifices to Satan, and that they'd use special powders to bring death to men, animals, and crops. Now check this out. As all the lords are sitting there, astonished as they're hearing this confession, one of them stands up and corroborates the story. The Admiral of France, Gaspard de Coligny, said his men had just arrested a young boy a few months earlier who had been accused of killing two men he worked for. All right, now listen to this. The boy had found his bosses casting powders on houses and wheat while uttering the words, "A curse on these crops, on this house, and on this land." That obviously freaked him the heck out. So when the boy found their powders, he took some and threw them on the bed where the two men were sleeping. The next day, the men were dead, black and swollen. So the Admiral had heard about this other story before Toisechel was ever brought in. Amazingly, this French magician who was confessing before the king agreed that this kind of thing really happened and started telling them many similar stories. So what happened? The king didn't burn this wizard at the stake. He demanded the man reveal his accomplices or die. But Toisechel couldn't reveal them all because he said, quote, "There were more than 100,000 in this realm." Now, when Bodin was chronicling all this, he thought it was possible Toisechel was exaggerating to make his crime of witchcraft seem more common or something. I mean, more than 100,000 witches in France, that's a lot. But Toisechel did claim it was so widespread and carefully arranged that almost all of them got away, even after confessing, quote, "such abominable wickedness that the air was contaminated." Bodin believed that God, in his anger, sent down terrible punishments. But why do we care? Could any of it be true? Remember how Toisechel specifically mentioned the witches dancing? Is this what people were bewitched by literally in the dancing plague of 1518? Was it a curse? I don't know, but I do know that when he mentioned those powders the witches used, I wanted to look deeper, and boy did I find something weird. Have you ever heard of zombie powder? Maybe you've seen the 1988 horror movie The Serpent and the Rainbow about voodoo and zombies.
Somebody brought him back from the grave. And I want to know how they did it.
Well, it was inspired by a nonfiction book published 3 years earlier by the Harvard ethnobotanist Wade Davis. Davis wanted to know more about a Haitian man who claimed to have been turned into a zombie after his death and forced to work as a slave. And this is where it gets weird. Yeah, if this story weren't weird enough. New York psychiatrists were intrigued by the possibility of finding the mystery drug for some reason, so they funded Davis's trip. Why did these psychiatrists think this was legit? There was apparently enough documented evidence from the American-run hospital in Haiti where the man had turned up before his death. So what was in this mystery zombie potion? With an alarming rumored group of ingredients like paralyzing pufferfish venom, the crushed skull of a recently deceased infant, freshly killed blue lizards, a dried toad, and more. This zombie powder would reportedly create a death and resurrection of a victim who would then be turned into a slave. What's weird is that the Haitian man named Clervius Narcisse had checked himself into a hospital in 1962 with a fever and spitting up blood. 3 days later, he was declared dead and held in cold storage for a day before he was buried. But Narcisse turned up again in 1980, alive. Narcisse said he'd been conscious but paralyzed during his death and burial when he was removed from his grave and forced to work at a sugar plantation. How did someone force him to work there? Well, by giving him doses of a strange substance created by a dark priest via voodoo magic. And there were other zombies working with him, he said. After the overlord priest died, Narcisse came out of his trance and returned to his family 18 years after he'd been buried in the ground. You might notice that Narcisse is a French name. Well, Haiti was a French colony, so there's obviously a lot of French influence. Is it possible that French magic and native Haitian practices over time actually overlapped? What if zombie powder were in existence long before the 1960s? Remember what Toisachel said when he confessed before King Charles IX? He said in 1571 that the people practicing witchcraft in the region of France used special powders to bring death to men, animals, and crops. Was it zombie powder or something different? And have we come full circle to the dancing plague of 1518? I mean, a little powder and maybe it made their minds whacked, so they started dancing with these alleged French witches. I know that sounds a little crazy. Today, most explanations say that the use of tetrodotoxin from the pufferfish just makes people numb and start hallucinating, which can open them up to suggestion by shamans. Some have even accused that ethnobiologist Wade Davis of fraud, you know, the guy who found the zombie powder initially, because what he witnessed in Haiti sounds so incredibly unbelievable. But technically, we don't know for sure that tetrodotoxin was even in this zombie powder for sure. I'm not making any conclusions here, so it's up to you what you think. I do think it's weird that the whole zombie case was documented and verified by American doctors' testimonies, though, and that the New York psychiatrists were so interested. And what were they hoping to do with the zombie powder once they got it? So we know what was going on in France during the 1518 dancing plague, but what caused it? There have actually been other dancing plagues throughout history, but this one is maybe the most famous. So was this all mass hysteria, like monkey see, monkey do, that caused the dancing plague? Was it as simple as all those people suffering from ergotism from eating moldy food? Honestly, that example is the most annoying to me. In my research, people seem to constantly use this as an explanation for things that they can't explain. And I get it. It is one common explanation, and it does cause twitching and hallucinations or something, but it wouldn't necessarily make people dance for days. Yeah, we'd have people dancing for days throughout history if that were the case. Then there's the possibility of demonic possession or this being a curse-like plague. There are stories in history of people essentially putting themselves into trances by dancing, and then other entities are able to come in and use the person's body however they wish. In 1518, the people's bodies were not just convulsing or shaking, but were actually moving as if they were purposefully dancing.
Dance until you die!
But some of the people cried and begged for it to stop, as if they didn't want it to be dancing at all. So were they possessed or cursed or something else? There's another belief that Saint Vitus would punish sinners by making them dance. So was it all just religious fanaticism? Most importantly, what were the people doing that they thought they were being punished for in the first place? I mean, all of that is confusing in this story. One of the chroniclers of this dancing plague said, "It's presumably because the dancers of 1518 believed themselves to have been cursed from heaven rather than hell, that there are no reports of them indulging in lascivious behavior." So you might be asking, well, Rob, what do you think? I think there's definitely more to this dancing plague than meets the eye. And in fact, Europe was a bizarre place throughout the 1500s. I can't really get over the fact that people were using these weird powders, that people were dying from powders, and then over in Haiti there was zombie powder being used to reanimate corpses. There's an entire movie based on this concept, which everyone thinks is fiction, but come to find out it's based on a nonfiction story. If these claims are true, that means there were people using strange substances which today's scientists and doctors do not recognize as being real. What does that mean for us? And does it give credence to other claims in history, like any of the testimonies from the Salem witch trials, where people were claiming creepy witches were actively screwing with them? Now, regardless of that separate rabbit hole, anytime something weird happens, like a dancing plague, the best thing people can do is look inside themselves for the answer. So hopefully when things got intense in 1518, they were able to do that, and that's why things in Strasbourg ultimately eased up. Through all of this, though, the biggest thing to me was why the New York psychiatrists in our modern times funded a Harvard ethnobiologist's trip to Haiti, tasked with bringing back the answers about zombie powder. The American hospital down there had documented this patient dying, and he turned up 18 years later, claiming to have been a zombie slave. Why in the world was that legit enough for the New York psychiatrists? What did they know that we don't? And they wanted to get some of that stuff in America? Isn't that crazy? If zombie powder and dancing plagues are real, what else is going on in this world that we have no idea about? From ancient peoples faced with plagues up until now, it seems that people have remained both fascinated by plagues and terrified by them. All I know is that if I'm ever hit with a dancing fever, I hope I look half as cool as Rick Astley. But what do you think about the dancing plague? Leave me a comment with your thoughts, or let me know what song would make you lose control of your dance moves like these poor souls. If you like this episode and want more, please consider supporting my work by pledging on our website, themetaphysical.tv. With your help, I can make more videos, more merch, which I designed myself, by the way, and also more exclusive episodes, like The Mystery of the Ohio Melonheads, Abandoned Dudleytown and the Dark Entry Forest, and more. You can also get a bag of delicious metaphysical coffee every month if you want your mornings to be out of this world. Remember to like and subscribe to help the channel grow as well. And if you want to hear longer conversational episodes right on YouTube, our metaphysical podcasts dive into more paranormal, bizarre, and otherworldly events, so check those out. And with that, I hope you thought this episode was out of this world. All I know is that if I'm ever hit with a dancing fever, I hope I look half as cool as Rick Astley. Never gonna give you up. No, I'm not gonna do that.